everyone, this is Joe from Scarecrow Joe's Studio. Welcome back to part 4 of our paper mache skull and books tutorial. In this segment we are going to continue on our sculpts. In the last segment we began sculpting out or layering on some clay and sculpting out our books. We did one side of each of them. And we also applied a thin layer of clay to the back of the skull and the bottom of the skull. So we're going to continue on with sculpting here. Not going to waste any time going over tools and materials needed for this particular segment because they're exactly the same as the last one, with the exception of some of these teeth here. I have created some teeth for my my skull. These teeth are made out of original Sculpey clay, so it isn't anything fancy. It's the cheapest oven baked Sculpey clay, polymer clay that you can get. I like creating teeth out of this material because it lends it a different texture against the paper mache. And so on this sculpture here, I did use some of the Sculpey teeth, and I laid it right inside the clay and sculpted a little bit over with the paper mache clay. I think it looks really cool. I think it gives it a different texture and lends it some more interest. You can, of course, just go ahead and sculpt your teeth in using paper mache clay. And skip this all together. But depending on how far we get in this segment, we may be sculpting out our skull if we get that far. And so if you are choosing to use some Sculpey clay or even an air dry clay, make sure you get your teeth done and ready to go before you start sculpting in the face, because you're going to want to lay these in directly into that wet clay. Press that into that wet clay so it'll adhere and you won't have to use any kind of glue at all. Actually, before we start back up on this sculpting this out, I did want to point out something that happened to my bottom book here. As you can probably see, it raised up off of my platform here that I built the pages on. If you recall, I hot glued that in place. And normally what I do is I will set these things in front of a fan. However, because it was a nice sunny hot day outside, I took it upon myself to put them out just and let them dry naturally in the sun. Well, the problem with that is that the hot glue got hot again and released in certain areas, causing this to bend while it was drying. These ends to bend and kind of concave a little bit. It's not a catastrophic failure by any means. I can go ahead if I wanted to and press that down and glue it back. That would be fine. Or I don't know, you could be, you know, as Bob Ross would say, happy little accident. Maybe this does lend it a little bit more interest. So I think what I'm going to do is leave it the way it is and just kind of sculpt around that. Leave those edges a little raised and see what happens. The only problem is with doing that is that it does not give you a completely flat surface area for your next book to sit on. And again, that's not a big deal. You can choose to either adhere these books together, like I did with this sculpture here. I did adhere, everything is adhered together. I can actually pick up the skull, pick it up by its skull. Everything's kind of adhered together. I didn't use any glue by adhering them together. I just used my paper mache clay and some paste. So that's how I did that, but we'll get into that a little bit later on in this tutorial. You don't have to attach them together. You could leave them completely as separate elements, including the skull. And that option actually will give you the ability to move your books in any direction you want. Maybe it'll make it for easier storage too when you go to put this away after Halloween. You can store it like this in some kind of a box. Whereas that you're obviously, if you're going to adhere them all together, you don't have that many options. It is what it is. It's going to be that piece forever. So food for thought on that, but I thought I'd show you what happened here and how I'm just going to go ahead and leave that and sculpt around it. All right, now let's get going. Okay, I'm going to start on this is my top book, obviously. That's why it says top book on there. I'm going to go ahead and start on my top book, and I'm going to sculpt in the pages. Pretty simple technique here. I'm just going to go ahead and take some of my paper mache clay, and keeping in mind that I do want to retain these edges here where the binding or the book cover comes up over, where that book cover comes up, top and bottom cover come up over those pages. So I don't want to completely fill this in so that's flush against that area. I'm just putting in the clay so that I can create my pages here. And again, this is a fresh batch of clay. I love to work with fresh clay. This is again the paper mache clay using cellulose fiber insulation that I normally use probably for about, I don't know, 90% of all of my paper mache art. This stuff does have a shelf life, guys, so definitely you want to keep that in mind. It does have a shelf life, so if you're not making a bunch of stuff, you're going to want to make it in smaller batches, and I do have tutorials on how to make this specific clay in a large batch or a smaller batch, and just make enough that you're going to need for what you're currently working on, because I would say within 3 days, you know, this stuff will start to turn. It can mold, it'll start smelling funky, and then you won't want to work with it. So keep that in mind. So now that I've filled in where my pages are going to be, I'm just taking bits of clay and I am going around the areas of the book covers here that I did not put any clay on when I clayed over just that one side. So that's what I'm working on there, getting all that clayed over. Now, depending on how comfortable you are in sculpting all of your books out at one time, because I will tell you, it'll get a little weird. It'll get a little bit difficult and a little cumbersome still to handle if you're sculpting the whole thing out. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and sculpt them all out, get these pages done so that I can get them set up and drying to move on for the next step after this. So I'm going to continue on here, and I'm going to go ahead and clay over my book edges, as well as filling in all of these areas here with the paper mache clay to create my pages. And so as you can see, I've got to a point where I have 1, 2, 3 of the sides done, and I'm on the last side here, and all I have to do is cover up these edges with the paper mache clay. This is where it gets, where I was saying before, where it could get a little bit cumbersome to handle, because you can't really put it down on your surface like this. It's going to disturb the clay that you just put on that. So you really just have to kind of hold it, and on your last, your last section for your pages and your book, top and bottom, you just have to hold it and sculpt around those edges. There's really, nothing else that you could do at this point to get around that, except for, of course, you could leave that edge, let it dry, and then go back and sculpt those areas in, and that would be completely fine as well. But for the purpose of this video, I'm gonna push forward and continue on and sculpting these books out. Right, so all of the edges, all of the pages, all of those things have been clayed over with some clay. I have taken this and I've put it on a plastic container. That's going to make it a lot easier to handle at this point. And then with my paper mache paste, which again is just a thin mixture of flour and water, I'm going to go in and I'm going to go ahead and just start smoothing in these areas here, where that dry clay meets that wet clay, or where the wet clay meets the dry clay on top of this book here. I'm just really kind of blending that in, taking the time to blend that in so that I don't have these big ridges overlapping that dry clay. This does not have to be perfect. Again, we're making old books, old like haunted library type books, so just keep that in mind. We are going to flip this over in a second, but I'm just going to make sure I'm going to go in and I'm going to smooth everything, all of the edges, all of the pages, or where we're going to represent the pages, all of that. And then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do some blending with all of this clay that is overlapped on this. Alright, I've got all of that smoothed over with my paintbrush and my paste, and I'm just taking my little sculpting tool here and I'm going in and just smoothing it out a little bit more. I'm actually not so much smoothing it out because I'm going to go ahead and rough it up, so it's not going to matter. I'm basically pressing down in these areas to make sure that I have that definition between the books, the book covers, and the pages are pretty pronounced. I don't want that to get lost. I want that to be defined. So I'm just going in, not so much to smooth all of this, but just to make sure that those areas are more defined. I'm holding it from the spine that's dry. All of this has the paste on it. I'm taking my little, this is just a basic little sculpting tool. It's shaped like a little kind of a flat arrowhead. I'm taking that and I'm just going in with, while the clay is wet, obviously you don't want it to dry, otherwise this is not going to work. I'm just going in and I'm making those indentations or those lines that's going to represent those pages. I want it kind of rough looking. You see how that looks there? I want it rough looking because these pages, they're again, they're old. These are old books. They're kind of disintegrating. They're falling apart, that kind of thing. So I'm really disturbing the clay. And again, I'm holding it from the dry side. If you don't have a sculpting tool such as this one, a toothpick works just as well for this. So you can use a toothpick, that's not a big deal, that'll work too. The other thing that you could do is take, and if you wanted to make some like little like holes, or you know, bigger sections where the pages are just kind of ripped, disintegrating on the edges, you know, you can remove some of that clay, disturb some more of that clay in those areas, make some holes, like maybe some insects have gotten to some of these areas. All these things are just going to make it a little bit more interesting in your piece. When you do these, just these little tiny details that really make them stand out. So that's done. Those sections are done. The dry side of the book here, I'm going to go ahead and as you could see where I did overlap a little of the wet clay onto that dry clay, I did smooth that out. Again, I didn't get crazy with it. I wasn't very concerned about it because these books are supposed to look old. Anyway, on that dry side, I'm going to flip it and turn it so that that's facing down. And now that's going to allow me to be able to manipulate this without disturbing any of the wet clay. So if if you have two books, you're gonna need two plastic, you know, stands or something to put these on so that they will dry without them being handled any further. But I'm just, like I did the other side of the cover, I'm just applying a thin layer of clay. After I apply that thin layer of clay, I'm going to go ahead and take my paste and my paintbrush, smooth it over. Then I'm going to take my spoon here, the concave side, and smooth it over even more. Okay, I've got my thin layer of clay on there. Once again, paste and the paintbrush. I'm going to go ahead and smooth this all out. I'm going to pay particular attention to the spine area here where I have this wet clay that overlapped onto that dry clay. I really want to smooth that in, feather that into that dry clay so I don't have this huge ridge. So anywhere you have wet clay overlapping dry clay, you really want to pay attention to those edges. Make sure you're smoothing those in. Alright. Not really concerned about it being completely smooth, but the reason that I like this step here is to make sure that it's even. So that when I go and attach my skull, because this is the top book, and if I choose to attach the skull, like I said, you don't have to attach it at all. You can leave these in separate elements. But if you're going to, I mean, either way, you want it to have at least a pretty even surface for your books to sit on top of each other, whether they're going to be permanently attached or not, and also your skull. So that's the reason for this. It's not so much to smooth it, it's just to make sure that we have an even layer on the whole book here. Alright, last thing, and this is the same thing I did with the other side. If you recall, I put in that marking or that indentation using this long paintbrush here to kind of give it that illusion or look that there's a binding in there. So same thing, same exact thing as I did on the other side of my books, I'm going to do on all of these. So yep, there you have it. Alright everyone, so this was a quick little segment on just how to sculpt out the rest of your books. You know, the next segment we're going to concentrate on sculpting out our skulls completely and pressing in those teeth if you have made the teeth out of the polymer clay or an air dry clay. So that's going to be in the next segment. We'll finish up the skull. So off camera, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on my other two books here that I showed you that I did on the top book. So I'll do that off camera. I don't feel like you guys need to watch me over and over again. Make sure that when you complete your books, you're putting them on, you know, a plastic container or something like that. Put them in front of a fan to let them dry completely. It's going to take a few days. So in a few days, those will be ready to go, to be attached together or not, whatever you decide. And then also, in the meantime, we're going to get working on this skull, get this completely done, sculpted out, detailed out, teeth pressed into the wet clay, and then we'll be ready to attach the skull to that top book. But until then, I thank you for watching, and if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, and I'll catch you in the next one.